Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another very special edition of the Democratic View. I'm the hostess. My name is Phyllis Italiano, and I am very honored today to have with us our representative to the United States Congress, Representative Timothy Bishop.
Thanks for having me on, Phyllis.
Always a pleasure.
Always love coming here. Thank you.
Yes, you are what I would call a Southampton Bonica. Born and raised.
Yep.
And I always tell people you used to pick potatoes in the fields of your grandfather's farm.
Yep. My grandfather had a 200-acre potato farm, he and his brother, in Sagaponack. And in my early adolescence, I used to work on that farm, and I loved it. I loved every second of it.
I know. Isn't that wonderful?
Yep.
Was a great place to be in those days.
It was.
Too.
I got to be with my grandfather, and it was wonderful. I mean, to be out on those fields at 6:30 in the morning and watch the sun come up over the ocean, it was fantastic.
Wow.
Yep.
Bet you didn't know that property was going to be the...
It did not. Yep.
Well, I would like to talk about an issue that's very important to me. I'm a woman, and I am very interested in the woman's right to choose and have control over their reproductive lives. And I'd like to know what your position is on that issue.
I'm pro-choice. I support Roe v. Wade. But, you know, what I sort of usually think of choice in the same way that President Clinton talked about it, which is that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, with the emphasis on rare. But I do believe that a woman does have the right to control her own body, so I support the right to choose.
And also, part of that is access to birth control.
No question. And that's one of the things about the Affordable Care Act that I think is so valuable, is that it defines access to contraceptives as a component, a minimum component of every insurance policy sold on the exchanges, that part of what those policies must cover is access to contraceptive services. I think that's very important. And what's been interesting is to watch the reaction to that. There's been, you know, outrage and an outcry. What I just said has been the law in the state of New York since, I think, 1999, that insurance policies sold in the state of New York since 1999 have had to include access to contraceptive services. Not the case across the country, but it has been the case in New York. And I think that's a good thing. I think that there should be, that should be covered in policies. The other thing I would say is I think the recent Supreme Court decision, the so-called Hobby Lobby decision, was a wrongly decided decision. I hear people all the time say that we should not have the government involved in a person's health care decisions, but we would allow an employer to be involved in someone's health care decisions. I mean, because that's what Hobby Lobby does. Hobby Lobby says that an employer can see to it that the policies they provide to their workers not include access to contraceptive services. I just think that's wrong. I think that that's something that a woman and, you know, her spouse or her partner should be able to judge on their own. I don't think an employer should be able to step in and say, sorry, I disagree.
You know, they call it the Obamacare. And I'm not going to get into it because it's been bandied around enough. But, you know, 10 years from now, it will not be known as Obamacare. It will be called the Affordable Care Act.
Yes.
Which,
go ahead.
Which, by the way, my daughter had, for the first time in a long time, as a single woman, was able to get health care under the Obamacare. So I'm crazy about it.
I also think 10 years from now, people are going to look back and they're going to say, do you mean to tell me there really was a time in this country when people did not have access to good and affordable health care? I mean, you really mean to tell me that an American citizen could not get a policy? And I think that what we have now is, for the first time, the American people can afford to buy, all Americans can afford health care coverage. That's a very good thing.
It certainly is. And now let's go on to just a little bit about the economy. We know that the amount of jobs on the last report is up. You know, unemployment is down. And the debt is also down.
Yes.
So it looks like we have very slowly recovered from that 2008 crash, which, by the way, happened under the Bush administration?
Yes, a couple of things. One, we've had 55 consecutive months of private sector job growth. We have now replaced all of the jobs that were lost during the recession that President Obama inherited from President Bush. And we still have a ways to go, no question about it. But unemployment in Suffolk County is now under 5, which is really good. And again, we still have a ways to go, but we are clawing our way back to some stability for the middle class that was just destroyed by the recession of 2008. And one of the things that I hear people say all the time is that the government should just get out of the way. The government is causing its regulation is causing businesses to struggle, and the government should just get out of the way. I think as in everything in life, what we need here is balance, and I think people should recognize that the government getting out of the way is the primary cause of the collapse of 2008. The regulators just walked off the field, and it was the wild, wild west on Wall Street, and the selling of credit default swaps and all of those things. So I think there's a real role to play for government regulation. Now, government regulation can be carried too far, and it can become difficult for businesses to deal with. But the notion that government should just walk off the field and get out of the way, we've been there, and we lost several million jobs as a result, and trillions of dollars worth of retirement savings were lost as a result.
Wow, wow. Well, and also I did want to mention about Brookhaven National Labs and how you helped in that particular instance.
Yes, there was a proposal that actually had been, that had great support in the House to cut the funding of the what's called the Office of Science by 1/3, and that funding cut would have been equally distributed across the 12 Office of Science, Department of Energy labs. So Brookhaven Lab would have been cut by roughly 1/3. It would have required the layoff of approximately 1,000 of their 3,000 employees. And I was able to, to lead the fight in the House, Senator Schumer in the Senate, to block that, to see to it that those jobs were protected at Brookhaven Lab. These are good, solid, middle-class jobs, well-paying jobs, but they are also jobs that the work that's being done by the people who have these jobs is absolutely vital to our nation in terms of healthcare, in terms of scientific research, in terms of advances in manufacturing, advances in energy conservation, lots of things. I mean, the seeds of lots of what we do here are planted at places like Brookhaven Lab, and then the private sector takes advantage of what's been learned as a result of government-sponsored research. So it's really, really important.
I also want to mention, you're talking about government, obviously I know I look pretty good, but I am over 65. So I, after all, am very much a part of Medicare. And I know that your opponent, who is a Tea Party person, is interested in privatizing Medicare.
Well, what's interesting about my opponent, the piece of legislation that would privatize Medicare is the House budget resolution that Congressman Paul Ryan has written for each of the last 4 years. And that piece of legislation actually does basically take Medicare for anybody under the age of 55 and turns it into a private system, turns it into people under the age of 65 would, when they turn, in Paul Ryan's construct, when they turn 67, not 65, get a voucher. They would then go into the individual market and try to buy a policy with whatever the voucher would let them buy. And most people, most healthcare experts say that would change. Right now, the ratio for someone who's a Medicare recipient is they pay roughly 30% of their healthcare expenses out of pocket, and Medicare covers roughly 70, round numbers. That would flip that. if people were had to go into the private market. So the policy would cover roughly 30%, and the individual would be paying 70%, because seniors are difficult to insure because they actually make claims. They actually use their policies. Now, what my opponent has successfully avoided in doing throughout this campaign is telling people where he stands on that proposal. When it first came out, his response was that he hadn't had a chance to study it. And then every other time he was asked about it, he simply refused to give a direct answer. And my own view is that the people of this district have a right to know where he stands. I mean, that document, the Ryan budget, the Republican budget, is the principal governing document. I mean, the Republicans have said this, that this would be how they would govern if they had the majority in both the House and the Senate and had the presidency. So I think the people of this district have a right to know where my opponent stands on this sort of overarching governance document. He has not seen fit to provide that. Where I stand is that I'm opposed. I voted against it. I have voted against it each of the 4 years that it's been introduced in the House. And I think it's a document that is very, very destructive for lots and lots of people. Medicare recipients, Medicaid recipients, student financial aid recipients, public schools in terms of Title I and IDA. It's a document that would be devastating to much of what we have had the government do in lots of different areas.
Title I, as an educator, I know what Title I does from a poor district that I was in.
Huge cuts in Title I and IDEA. If it were to ever take on the force of law, let us all hope that it never does, but if it were, local school districts would be devastated by the Title I cuts, and local school districts would only have really two choices. One would be to stop doing the things that Title I pays for, or the other would be to try to pierce the property tax cap and ask local taxpayers to now pick up the burden that the federal government is walking away from. I don't think either alternative is acceptable. But yet, that's precisely what the budget would do.
I'm just going to explain to the audience because they probably are not familiar with Title I, but I mean, if you have a reading specialist that in your school that deals with children who are having difficulties in their learning of reading and meets with small groups of kids, that's Title I.
Yep.
And that would be cut. Now,
Yes.
That would be a tragedy, because many of those kids, like myself, as a dyslexic person, who struggled to learn to read and now has 2 master's degrees, let me tell you, I would have been lost if I did not have that extra help. I want to go on also to another subject, which is your response to veterans. As a person who is also on the East End Veteran Show, we know what a lot of people don't know, which is that you help to facilitate the opening of a facility in Riverhead to take care of veterans, instead of, if you're having, even something like a flu shot or hearing aids and stuff, you don't have to go all the way to Northport, which was a tremendous help to the local veterans around here. And we really appreciate that. I also wanted to mention something called, which you had mentioned on a previous show, something called burn pits. Would you tell us what
let me talk about the burn pits. And with respect to the clinic in Riverhead, I did work with the people from the county to make sure that we could bring healthcare services in a way that was more accessible, particularly to East End veterans. To go from Amagansett, let's say, to Northport is a long way. Burn pits. When we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, the contractor that was responsible for operating the bases decided to dispose of the waste that these bases created in open-air burn pits, huge open-air burn pits. One of them, the most infamous one, was 6 football fields in length. Wow. And I mean, just imagine that it's inconceivable that this would be allowed in this country. And all the waste that the base produced was placed in these burn pits and set on fire, and the fires burned 24/7. So there was a thick black cloud hanging over most of these bases. And our troops began to return home complaining of lots and lots of different maladies. You know, I've been one man that we've worked with he was in tip-top condition when he went back, when he went over there. When he came home, he could not even climb a flight of stairs without being out of breath. Because he had, I think he had what's called COPD. Lots of asthma, lots of COPD, lots of emphysema, lots of gastrointestinal disorders, and tragically, all of this is tragic, lots and lots of cancers. So I was one of the first people in the Congress to even know about these burn pits. I was told about it by, I have a Veterans Advisory Board. A man who served on that board had a daughter who was a nurse in Iraq, and she was sending him pictures, and he said to me, "Do you know about this?" And you know, and I did not, and I found out very quickly none of my colleagues did either. So first thing I did was write legislation to get them banned, and we were successful in getting that legislation passed within a larger piece of legislation called the National Defense Authorization Act. Then we began working on establishing a registry for all of any member of our armed forces who served on a base that had a burn pit, so that that person would be notified, potential health risks that he or she had been exposed to, they would get screening, treatment, and so on. That registry now exists. So the third thing that I'm now working on is legislation that has bipartisan support that would create 3 centers of excellence for research, diagnosis, and treatment of burn pit related ailments. And I hope we can get this passed. There would be a national competition to be one of these centers of excellence. But I think Stony Brook University Hospital, for example, would have a great chance because they are one of 3 hospitals in the country that is at the forefront of dealing with this issue. So it's hugely important. My fear is if we don't jump on this, that burn pit exposure is going to be the Agent Orange of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and we're still adding diseases to the presumptive cause list for Agent Orange.
Do I know about that?
Yeah.
Yes, of course, having worked with Joe Giannini,
Yes.
I know that his heart condition has now finally been linked to his exposure in Vietnam to Agent Orange, which is a very destructive, it's dioxin, a very destructive chemical. And speaking of what is existing in the environment, I've always liked to have quote you on something you said on one of my very early interviews with you, which is that you linked the economy and the environment together, saying the economy is the environment and the environment is the economy. And if we do not have pristine beaches and clean waters to swim in, vistas to look out over, who is going to want to come here?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I cannot tell you how much I have explored that as someone who interviews other people about how important that is. And your rating right now with the environmental groups appears to be quite high.
Yeah, I think I have an A rating, lifetime A rating from the Sierra Club and the League of Conservation Voters. I'm endorsed by them in I've been endorsed by them in every election I've ever been in. And I'm also endorsed by the Long Island Environmental Voters Forum, which is a local group. And my environmental record is one of the areas of marked contrast between me and my opponent. There's a group called EPL, Environmental Advocates. They just released their scorecard of state senators. He got a 50 out of 105. And I would offer, in contrast, State Senator Laval got a 90, very good grade, and Assemblyman Thiel got 100. Again, a very good grade. So my opponent's record on the environment is, to say the least, unfortunate. And frankly, I don't see how you can represent an area as environmentally fragile as Eastern Long Island and have as unconcerned a view of environmental quality as he appears to have.
And speaking of our environment, we all know that we are in a very precarious location here on the tip of Long Island. And although Superstorm Sandy did not do the damage to most places, although it did surge me, LIPA surged me, and if it hadn't been for your office getting me talking to LIPA people and getting them to pay for all of the stuff that they absolutely ruined in my house by leaving a floating neutral hanging, this lady would be a lot poorer than she is today. So I do appreciate the help that your office gave to me. But thinking again about places like Montauk, which are so completely vulnerable to a storm, when you drive there and take a look at it, it's almost really scary.
Well, I have fought very hard to bring the Army Corps of Engineers to the table to begin the construction of a dune realignment and beach nourishment project in the vicinity of downtown Montauk. We have won that battle, and the Corps will be there to begin the project in hopefully by late December. But certainly the project will be begun and finished before the spring. And it's a hugely important project in terms of stabilizing the beaches and protecting the infrastructure of downtown Montauk, which of course is crucial to the economic strength and vitality of Montauk and of the entire East End, for that matter. So I've worked hard with it. Fred Thiel and I have partnered on this. Jay Schneiderman has been very helpful. Senator Laval has been very helpful. And Larry Cantwell and the East Hampton Town Board have been great. So we have all collectively worked very hard on this, and thus far our efforts are paying off. As I said, the Corps will be there by the end of December to begin the process of solidifying those beaches. And this is a first step in what will be a two-step process of stabilizing the beach of Montauk. Second step will probably take place during calendar 2016.
Will that be part of the Fire Island to Montauk, the infamous study that I really, as a Fire Islander, was around when that was practically started?
Yes. It's going forward in two stages. One are two interim projects, Montauk being one of them, and the other is Fire Island being in effect some emergency repairs or interim repairs. Emergency is not the right word, to various communities in Fire Island. And then starting in the fall of 2015, the larger so-called Fire Island to Montauk Point reformulation study will start moving from west to east. So Fire Island will be the first part of it, and then coming out east, there'll be sand or beach nourishment in the Tiana section of East Quogue and Hampton Bays. There will be additional beach nourishment in West Hampton Dunes. There will be additional beach nourishment in Montauk, and so on.
Well, that is something I'm really looking forward to.
So am I. Trust me.
I can't tell you. I've been on the edge of my seat for 50 years waiting for that to happen. And I also wanted to thank you as a member of a group that meets almost every Monday, which is the Save EH, the PSEG. I'm going to call it an invasion of our East Hampton village and those poles, although it's also in the town as well. And I know this is not an easy one because FEMA is not as easy to move.
Well, it's really not FEMA. It's not a federal issue. I mean, this is an issue, the decision maker here is LIPA and PSEG. And we've been very clear with FEMA, and FEMA's been very clear with us, that if LIPA and PSEG request that they use some of the money that they are going to be receiving as a result of Sandy, that this would be considered an allowable, to bury the lines, would be considered an allowable use. So this is really a LIPA PSEG issue more so than it is a FEMA issue. I've been involved in this in an effort to try to be helpful and an effort to see to it that FEMA comes to the table and stays at the table. But this is much more, as I say, a LIPA PSEG issue. And so we have been, Fred Thiel and Ken Laval have been great on this, really taking the lead, because LIPA, as you know, is a state authority. And we just had a meeting last week in my office, people from the Public Service Commission, Senator Laval, Assemblyman Thiel, Mayor Rickenbach, Supervisor Cantwell, and myself, and we're just working to try to find every conceivable way of freeing up money to allow those lines to be buried.
Okay, well, we're looking forward to that,
I
too.
hope we're
because
successful.
holy mackerel, if anything, a storm ever happens, I mean, I don't know if anybody knows this, but in 1938, the winds on the eastern part of that cycle of a hurricane were 157 miles per hour.
How
And
much time do we have left?
we have 2 minutes.
I'll tell you a great story about the 1938 hurricane.
Please.
My mother and her two sisters went to school that morning. They lived in Sagaponack. They went to Bridgehampton School that morning. And the storm, came up the coast very quickly, plus forecasting wasn't all that great in those days, and communication wasn't all that great. So my grandfather decided to go and get them. Thought it would be the right thing. They could not get back to their home on Hedges Lane in Sagaponack because every way of getting to Hedges Lane had been blocked by trees falling and blocking the roadway. So they pulled over on the side of the road and literally crawled on their hands and knees across a potato field to a barn. And they rode out the storm in the barn. But the wind was so strong that they could not walk. The wind kept knocking them down. So here are these three young girls and my grandfather riding out the storm in a potato barn. But think about my grandmother sitting in the house all this time, no cell phones, wondering what's happened to her family.
Oh, my God. Well, I know. I mean, being a Fire Islander for so many years, they had stories like that, too, about Gus Pagels taking a ship and running it aground, and all of the residents who lived there, which were only a handful of people, in that boat, while the storm rushed over. The water of the highest wave hit Rhode Island. That's how high it was. But they were just in that boat, and it was amazing. That was quite a storm. I don't think people realize how.
No, people don't realize.
It's called the storm of the century, as a matter of fact, in history books. Congressman, I appreciate it, and
Thank you.
good luck. We'll be out there getting that vote out.
Thank you. That's what we need. Thank you.